Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Dan Wojcik, Associate Professor of English. He's the Director of the Folklore program as well. Wojcik's interests include contemporary folklore studies, urban ethnology and cultural theory, apocalyptic beliefs and millenarian movements, vernacular religion and alternative spiritualities, and outsider and visionary artists. Wojcik is a 2012-13 Oregon Humanities Center Teaching Fellow. During fall 2012, he taught a class he developed titled Apocalypse Now and Then, The End of the World in American Culture and Consciousness. Daniel, thanks for coming to UO Today.
Thank you for having me on your program, Barbara.
When you applied for that teaching fellowship and we knew it was going to deal with apocalypse, and during the term that the Mayan calendar was going to end, it seemed like a surefire big hit. The course is now over. You're just back from Mexico, and I would love to hear how your trip to Mexico went over the all-important date.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. It was great to get support for that class. The timing was perfect. And of course we talked about that date within the class. We kind of built up to it. Students wanted to talk about the supposed end of the Mayan calendar right away, but I made them study the history of American apocalyptic belief first, and then we got into it towards the end of that class. So I traveled to Mexico to Chichen Itza after class, reading all these wonderful student papers that I can tell you about. The range of topics that they engaged with was pretty fascinating. I gave them a fair amount of freedom on what they could do. They had to write 10-page papers for that class. And then I jetted off to Mexico. I went to Playa del Carmen, and then I went to Chichen Itza, where there's a great pyramid, Mayan pyramid, and there were various festivals and events associated with the pyramid happening throughout Mexico, actually. And it happened to be my birthday, and again, I received a fair amount of 15 seconds of notoriety for the fact that my birthday is on the solstice, December 21st. The alleged end of the Mayan calendar, and there's lots of speculation about what this means, and we can get into some of that as well. The Mayan people themselves didn't seem too concerned about the ending, and I met what were they? Astroarchaeologists. I was hanging out with astroarchaeologists who were archaeologists of like ancient astronomy, and most of these scholars kind of refuted this idea that the Mayan calendar would end, although there's some indication that a certain time cycle would end, but there were no prophecies by the Mayan people. Yeah.
Let me stop you right there.
Sure.
So in preparing to talk to you today, I read as much as I could get my hands on of your work and your other interviews, and I gather it was a 5,125-year Mayan calendar cycle. Is that correct?
Well, that's, again, I'm not an expert on all the numbers here. So again, I focus on what people believe, and I'll leave it to the archaeoastronomers to go through all the dates. I mean, one fellow, Mark Van Stone, has written on this, and John Carlson, they were there, and NASA has published on it as well. So there are different time cycles within the Mayan calendar, ancient Mayan calendar system, quite sophisticated. And there were a couple of texts that indicated that a certain time cycle would end on December 21st. Or according to these archaeologists, December 22nd, December 23rd, or maybe the Maya people didn't take into account other dates, leap years and things, so it may have ended earlier or later. So, and the ancient Mayan also predicted dates in the future where the cycle would end as well. So there's lots of speculation. Nonetheless, other visionaries and seers kind of became preoccupied or fixated on this particular date. Jose Arguelles is a well-known writer who promoted the harmonic convergence in 1987. And I don't want to get too esoteric with all of this stuff, but this was an event kind of like the things that were going on in Chichen Itza, where there was a belief that the world could end, but apocalypse could be averted through prayer and spiritual practices. So Arguelles and then Terence McKenna and others focused on this particular date, and it really exploded in popular culture and at the level of popular belief or folk belief or vernacular belief. So thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions believing something would happen on this day, either the end or the people I talked to down in Mexico seemed to think it would indicate a transformation of society. A better world would come after this click in the calendar.
So tell me exactly what was going on there. I've seen pictures of that great monumental pyramid at Chichen Itza. It is a very impressive physical structure. Was it a kind of a vigil? Was it a celebration? Was it a a collective gathering in fear? What was the spirit?
Right. Well, I think in terms of media coverage, not of that event, but in general, there was a lot of focus on fear, the end of the world, a planet colliding with Earth, earthquakes and such. But the people down there were I would call them pilgrims. They were spiritual people making a sacred journey to this particular site that they felt had spiritual significance. And people were going to other places as well, so Stonehenge, Mount Shasta, Palenque, all over the world. People feel there are these places where one can go, and through prayer or ritual or ceremonies, they can kind of transform the world. It's just a place to be. So this is a way for maybe to ritualize their lives. What was going on there? Well, there was a festival organized by Michael DiMartino, who put on a series of workshops. He invited spiritual leaders, so-called wisdom keepers from a range of cultures, as well as some local Maya people. A number of people from Eugene, Oregon. I was meeting lots of people from Eugene actually down there. It seemed like everyone I met had been to the country fair, so this was quite interesting. There was a trance music that is believed by some to have a spiritual component. There was a vigil, sort of a prayer vigil at 5:11 a.m. When the solstice was officially beginning, apparently, which would have been 3:11 a.m. in Eugene. So throughout the world, apparently, people were lighting candles and praying. So there were hundreds of people gathered there, and I was documenting this with my video camera. And some good footage, some is a little rough, but it's still a pretty good documentation. And people really holding hands, praying, singing, some were weeping. People primarily from the United States, but Europe, but also there were people from other parts of, well, all over, I guess. It was more mixed ethnically than I thought it would be. And then after this gathering, people actually made sort of a walk, I guess it would be a kind of a pilgrimage to Chichen Itza, where they believed these spiritual energies would be amplified. And there was a ton of stuff going on there, really. People from all over the world singing, playing musical instruments, engaging in rituals, meditating. One guy was meditating and he had a hula hoop going around his neck at the same time. It was some interesting kind of new form of spirituality that I hadn't seen before. Lots of things I hadn't seen before, in fact. A Mexican group engaging in dances and prayer. So again, there were a few other people down there along with me documenting this. There weren't many actually scholars there. And we can talk about why this was the case. Lots of believers, but I think the beliefs were a little off the radar of scholars of religion. So it went on all day, and then there were a number of other events. I can tell you about the range of things that went on. I mean, there was a dance party that went all night, the Ascension Dance Party, that had spiritual components, kind of like a rave, I guess. And then workshops and spiritual, I guess, leaders, at least spiritual leaders considered in this community as being important. And a lot of the talk was about some kind of transition, a shift in human consciousness, the return of divine principles, less consumerism. So again, some of these ideas were mocked by the press, but overall I thought the vibe was pretty upbeat and positive. A lot of patchouli.
A lot of patchouli.
Little marijuana smell occasionally, although drugs were not supposed to be part of this event, so that was all. I shouldn't be saying this, maybe we should cut this part actually, but it really was kind of like the country fair of Burning Man, and yeah, people were very friendly. And I interviewed, people were happy to talk to me. They were, especially when I told them I was from Eugene, Oregon, and a folklorist. I don't know why, they just opened up.
Well, someone was taking it seriously, which is
well,
important,
maybe.
I think. But
Yeah.
there's a couple of aspects of this I want to get back to.
Sure.
You mentioned focus on less consumerism,
Mhm.
but
Right.
pilgrimages, Burning Man, the country fair need huge infrastructure.
Right.
Who was providing services? Was there a touristic aspect of this?
Right, well there was. So this is it's a good mix of tourism, spiritual tourism, and pilgrimage. And some people were there maybe just to party. I met one guy from Portland. He just liked it good. He wanted to go someplace significant for this time. And although he had some kind of transformative experience as well. So it really blends, and scholars have talked about this intersection of tourism and pilgrimage. So there was an infrastructure. It pretty much fell apart, actually. The spiritual leaders have trouble maybe organizing such events, but most people had a pretty good time. There were others who were simply there as tourists, so others simply witnessing what the spiritual practitioners were doing. But there were various stages for performers and workshops and things. It was a bit chaotic, actually. could have been better organized. I mean, Burning Man is very, very organized. You know, I mean, really a tremendous amount of work and thought, and same with the country fair. This was difficult, maybe doing it in Mexico. This is what the organizer claimed, and he had some difficulties putting it all together. He pulled it off, but it was chaos. But I mean, this is maybe part of the shift. This is, in fact, what they said. This is a time of change, a time of chaos. We're going through a transition period. There's going to be chaos before the new era, the new age of Aquarius arrives. So some sense of humor, but some serious about this as well.
You took your documentary footage, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but you also brought back a few artifacts. Would you show off that splendid T-shirt you are wearing, please?
I couldn't resist. This is my
2012 Apocalypsis.
Apocalypsis.
Yes, and there's Chichen Itza at the bottom.
There's Chichen Itza, and then Kukulkan is coming. Kukulkan is the Maya deity, the feathered serpent, so he's kind of the equivalent of the Aztec Quetzalcoatl. And if you go to Chichen Itza, you'll see depictions of this deity at the base of Chichen Itza. So I couldn't resist. In fact, I was looking for a shirt, and then the guy didn't have anything in my size, and I said, what else do you have? And he had one tie-dye shirt, and I said, well, what do you got? And he pulled this thing out, and I couldn't resist. I was supposed to be buying these from friends of mine, but I started hoarding them all, so you'll be seeing me wearing them around campus.
I'm looking forward to it, a different one each day.
Sure.
Can we show off the other things that you brought with you?
Absolutely.
We have a small selection here. I'm going to start with this, which is in fact a calendar, correct?
That's right.
Can you talk about this piece a little bit?
Well, I mean, again, I don't want to seem like too much of a consumerist myself here. So I'm really interested in material culture, and I've written about folk art, and this would be an example of tourist art. So the material culture, the visionary art that was created there is something I'm writing about as well. So I was quite interested in what the local people were producing for the tourists, and I can't imagine this was available 15 years ago. So this seems like it's something that was created for local tourists visiting. So you have the Maya calendar here, or at least a representation of it. And again, this is apparently not found on any archaeological sites. It was created, I believe, in the 20th century, but this has kind of become the symbol of the Maya calendar with the man of time in the middle. And then this is sort of a life and death, or maybe death and rebirth mask, and that actually is traditional. So you see other masks like this. So there are lots of masks like this, some with a pyramid, others with various deities or totemic animals, but this was just a nice combination of the Mayan calendar and that image of death and rebirth, I think, is the way that it's thought. So that was simply unresistible for me. That was my birthday present to myself, along with the T-shirt.
It looks as though one could wear it as a mask.
You could wear it apart. It's a little heavy, and it's supposed to be a positive thing. It's not a morbid thing, but it is about the regeneration and supposedly Mayan beliefs about the afterlife. Again, I'm writing about this and I'm researching it, so I'll have more details later. And again, some of this stuff is sort of created for tourists, and others based in traditional folklore and mythology. So I'll try to unravel that with a couple of scholars down the road.
Well, speaking of created for tourists, could you tell us about this image? We've got two to show. This is the first one.
Okay, so this was actually being created by a man in Playa del Carmen, which is south of Cancun. And he was just a street artist doing these really spray can artistic pieces, not always of pyramids, but I asked him if he could do one of a pyramid. He had others, and he really went all out with this one. I think it's beautiful. He did it in about 5 minutes, and he was using various spray cans, and then kind of he had like I don't know, I wouldn't call it a flamethrower, but flames to kind of solidify, I guess, the colors. So it was a dramatic thing. He was sort of all by himself, and I bought one of these pieces, and then by the end, as he was creating it on the spot, there was a crowd of about 25 people gathered around and cheering him on. So it really was a whole event that I found to be fantastic. I actually, this one I didn't do anything. I just sort of watched, awe-inspired. He did another one, and I actually videotaped that, so I do have footage of this.
So
maybe you'll see it on YouTube. It'll be another bad video on YouTube. But he was really, really...
Is that this one that you're
really very cool
to?
about it. Yeah, this one I said, well, my birthday is December 21st, and a lot of the people I talked to at the Chichen Itza and elsewhere to talk about the influence of extraterrestrial intelligences or cosmic powers, or the Mayan people themselves may have come from the Pleiades. So it seems as though it's an ongoing theme within a lot of these beliefs. So I said, could you put a UFO in there for me as well? And he was more than happy to do it. He had a lot of fun. So this is another one that I was thinking I was going to give this to a friend, but I think I'm just going to have to Maybe we'll do
you
an
need to keep
exchange.
it.
Well, I think I need to keep
Yeah.
it. It was, I
And-
wanted to support him, and I'd like to go back, and as a folklorist, I would see him as a street artist, a vernacular artist, kind of a
Yeah.
folk artist. He was there he was there talking to a couple of police officers who were kind of admiring him, checking him out, just watching the peaceful scene in Playa del Carmen. And then I came along, and then there was a crowd later, but he would be an interesting study, certainly of a very creative man. Doing art on the street, so that would be a whole other project. Nothing to do with 2012, but local.
And you've written about UFOs, right? So
I have written about UFOs as a form of emergent mythology arising out of nuclear fear. A lot of people believe that, at least early on, that flying saucers would save humanity from nuclear destruction. So this is an ongoing belief, and it seemed to really be prevalent in the 2012 literature.
I want to get back to the not only the astrologists but also the astronomers' reaction to 2012. But
Okay.
first, let me show this last piece that we have to display, which is really splendid. You brought in a whole series of these, and we've just chosen this one. What are these?
Well, these are made by another man that I met down there who was very enthusiastic about this. And this is the Aztec Calendar. And this is often seen as the Maya Calendar. So you'll see people talking about the Maya Calendar and using this image so that the whole thing is incorrect. But he was interested in the Aztec Calendar and the very symbolism, and really a new calendar, different than the Gregorian calendar. And he really had researched this and done this with his son over about a 15-year period. And honestly, I don't have a lot of information. I wanted to follow up with an interview with him, and I will. He's based in San Francisco. So there's a whole system of calculating one's, astrological birth date within this calendrical system that he's researched pretty extensively, and he was quite articulate about it all. And it's complicated, though, so I'm not even going to try to go there. I mean, there's something else that was being distributed here, another, I don't know if you can see this,
I'll
but
hold it
you
up
can hold
and-
that, all right,
yeah.
another kind of
We'll put
calendar.
this one down.
These were free objects.
So this was just being
Just
handed
being
out
handed
at the festival?
out. I mean, there may be
Yeah.
something you can buy that goes with it, but again, you can kind of figure out your Mayan or Maya calendrical birth date and your totemic animal and your strengths or weaknesses. So it is astrology, although it's a different type of astrology. So this was common. I mean, there was a lot with astrology there, a lot with a lot of things dealing with, well, healing and personal transformation. Not too many objects for sale, actually, which was interesting. I thought there'd be more of a market of stuff, but not a lot, actually.
So perhaps that move towards less consumerism was actually being enacted there.
I think so, yeah.
But I have a question for you. One of the things that I stumbled across as I was doing this reading was the NASA website.
Right.
And I watched this wonderful video, which is just a little jewel in its own right, of a senior scientist from NASA.
Right.
Very serious man, refuting one by one the assertions about what was going to happen on December 21st.
Right.
And it is absolutely perplexing to me that NASA, this august conservative
Right.
agency, should find it necessary to put up a public website refuting all of this.
Right.
The implication is that there's a great many people invested in it and who believed it. Can you talk a little bit about the numbers? They're pretty staggering.
Well, I think they're pretty staggering. Again, it's hard to know, but it wasn't unusual for NASA to do it. I mean, there were some fears that children were being scared about all the end of the world talk. Again, there was end of the world talk, and also, transformation of the world at the religious level. But apocalyptic beliefs in general are quite pervasive in American society and throughout the world, with statistics indicating that about 35% of Americans, maybe higher than that even, believe that the world will end in their lifetime or could end in their lifetime. It's assumed that these are Christian Protestant beliefs, premillennial beliefs about the rapture and Jesus returning, catastrophe, and certainly millions of people believe this. But there are all other, lots of different ideas as well within the New Age groups, new paradigm movements, UFO beliefs, Rastafarianism within the environmentalist movement, within the Catholicism, in which, as far as I know, apocalyptic and millennial ideas are not part of the institutional doctrines necessarily. So within institutional Catholicism, the idea is one of amillennialism. There will be no earthly millennium, and all the stuff about apocalypse and the mark of the beast and that in the book of Revelation. It's all metaphorical. Right, so this is the institutional view, yet at the level of folk belief or popular belief, millions of people believing that the Virgin Mary is appearing and delivering apocalyptic messages to humanity to reform. And again, these aren't sanctioned by the institutional church. Occasionally, one or two of them will be sanctioned, but it's pretty rare. So the level of folk and popular belief, these ideas are extremely common, I think. In terms of the 2012 stuff, it's really difficult to know. I mean, there was one Reuters survey that said, I think, something like 15% of people surveyed in 16 different countries felt the world could end in their lifetime, or thought the world would end in their lifetime. And a significant number of them thought something could happen on December 21st. And the number was higher in the United States. Again, the end of the world could be a secular thing, just the comet wiping us out, or it could be a religious thing. So there are secular apocalyptic views and religious apocalyptic views. So it's very complicated, and scholars have talked about all the different types of apocalypticism, the 31 flavors of millennialism, I guess, or more than 31, I'm sure. But I think there was a lot of belief, and again, tons of stuff online, things being expressed on the internet. That's why I wanted to go to Chichen Itza and see what people are doing. I mean, some have said, well, everyone's talking about online, but no one really believes. But to see people in action doing it was, I think, important. And I have a European colleague of mine visited some places in Europe as well, and so he's documented what kinds of things were going on there too.
You made a point of saying that your trip to Chichen Itza and the other events in Mexico were with the intent to document respectfully. So that's obviously part of the folklorist approach, like an anthropological approach, right?
That's right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's important, I think, to respect people's religious beliefs. I mean, these kinds of ideas often get mocked. Apocalyptic beliefs in general are sort of stigmatized as a cult phenomenon, and no one believes them. Or in the instances in which there's some kind of violent outcome, those get highlighted. And of course, apocalyptic beliefs can be dangerous and can result in violence. They tend not to. But folklorists, like anthropologists, study culture, and we take what we call an emic approach, E-M-I-C, not anemic, but emic, from within, trying to understand the belief system from within. So whether you're studying Native American culture, African tribal societies, the New Age beliefs, the culture of steampunks or skateboarders or whatever it might be, you try to understand the beliefs, the rituals, why it's meaningful from within. And then ultimately, if you're a scholar, you then offer some kind of analysis of this using previous theories or developing new hypotheses about why these beliefs are meaningful, what needs they fulfill, whether they could be dangerous, whether they could be, whether they are sexist or racist or whatever. But initially you have to go in, I think, trying to understand these ideas. This doesn't mean you're promoting them. Sometimes people get confused because you write about them in a way that is honest and fair and ethical, and sometimes that could come off as celebratory. So there's a fine line, I think, between, being ethical and respectful. That can all sometimes be misinterpreted. But that's the approach that the folklorists take, like the anthropologists, sure.
You have a vocabulary, you've got a scholarly vocabulary for discussing this kind of concept and belief. And I have to ask you, because it may be my only chance to interview an eschatologist,
right,
to define what eschatology is, please.
Okay, I decided I'm an eschatologist lately because no one knows what it is. It makes me sound, it confuses people. But eschatologists, I guess, if I truly am one, is someone who studies the last things, endings, the end of the world. So really, it's looking at mythology, and my degree is in folklore and mythology from UCLA. So eschatologies are a form of mythology in the sense that they are sacred narratives about endings, and most societies have, religious societies have sacred beliefs about how the world will end, how it will be transformed, how a new age will come. So you have, I guess, cosmic eschatology, looking at endings of the world and a new world to be created, and then I guess you could also be a scholar of individual eschatologies, so beliefs cross-culturally about what happens to the soul after death. Does it go to heaven or hell, or is it reincarnated? So there are scholars of personal eschatologies as well. So it's an important aspect of scholarship, and scholars of religion talk about eschatologies as well. So that's what it is. It's different than scatology,
yes,
by
indeed.
the way, but it's
it is.
I'll stop there. Yeah,
and a more current term that I kept running across was simply end times. Is that right? End times.
That's a word that people use, and I think believers themselves talk about the end times. So folklorists kind of use the vocabulary of believers' end times, apocalypticism, those are common terms, yeah.
Before we run out of time, Daniel, I wanted to ask you to put this in the context of the course you taught and the folklore program of which you are the director.
Right.
So what students self-selected into this class, and what kinds of things did they want to work on?
It's interesting. I proposed it as an English class because I'm in the English department as well as in the folklore program. So I had primarily English students, and it filled very quickly. And I think they thought I was going to deal a lot with apocalyptic literature, which I didn't. And I told them that right from the start. Although that would be a good class for someone else to teach, and some of them did write about apocalyptic literature or apocalyptic themes in film, in comics, in role-playing games, a whole range of interesting things that they did. So when I explained to them that really I was coming at it from the perspective of folklore studies and really religious studies and cultural studies, most of them were on board, and they were a little, maybe a little confused at first, but I think they understood what the class was all about, looking at the range of beliefs in American culture, again, historically, from the beliefs of the Shakers to the Millerites to Native American ghost dance movements. We did a little bit with the early Puritans. And then more contemporary examples, the Waco tragedy, Jonestown, these kinds of things. And then a bit on popular culture, and I had a film festival associated with it, so part of the assignment was for them to go to a few of these films and review these films as they related to course concepts. So it was eclectic. We focused also on apocalyptic beliefs on the internet, conspiracy theories, which are quite big. And I tried to introduce them to what I thought were the most interesting or important theories in millennial studies. And we studied even things like Burning Man, which some have claimed to have apocalyptic themes too. So it was wide, it was diverse, and this is, I guess, one of the strengths of folklore studies is interdisciplinary. So it wasn't only English majors, there were students in psychology and anthropology as well. It was a good mix, and I think they really came a long way. At the end, I was quite proud of them. They had one discussion where a graduate student presented on, actually it was on the whole David Koresh Waco event, and they really had this very interesting debate about how it may have been averted or how it couldn't have been averted. Very thoughtful, and I just sat back. I didn't have to say a thing. I really thought they got it completely. I thought they could be advising the FBI or the ATF, which apparently has come a long way and now realizes that it's important to understand millennial beliefs, and not to say that a whole branch Davidian thing could have been averted, but there's some who felt that maybe with some understanding of religious belief systems, some of that could have maybe not happened. So I think the students really got it. And then their papers were really pretty interesting because they could do whatever they wanted. They had to approve it with me. They had to give me a proposal. But yeah, they really ran all over the place with it in terms of their interest. So it was quite interesting. Yeah. I learned a lot from this. I mean, this is what's great about folklore studies. I say this sometimes, maybe it's unfair, but if you're a literary scholar, you're an expert on a particular type of literature, it's hard for a student maybe to introduce new ideas to you. Maybe they can say things that are brilliant, but you sort of know it. But with folklore studies, when they're speaking from their own experiences, some of them did field work, really was some great stuff that I learned from them.
I have to stop you there.
Okay.
I'm afraid we're out of time.
All right,
I
good.
wish we could go on for another half
but
hour.
I'm sorry, we can do it again sometime.
We'll have you back.
Next time the world's ending, we can do it again.
It seems to happen regularly.
Pretty periodically. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for
having
me.
Great.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Professor Daniel Wojcik, Associate Professor of English and Director of the Folklore Program. He is a 2012-13 Oregon Humanities Center Teaching Fellow and taught a course in fall 2012 called Apocalypse Now and Then, The End of the World in American Culture and Consciousness. Thanks for watching.